Crime often comes with punishment, but some sentences are so shocking they leave you questioning the system. From brutal murders to unimaginable betrayals, these cases reveal the darkest sides of humanity and the consequences that follow. Let's take a look at some of the courtroom's most insane sentences. Granville Ritchie. In May 2014, Felicia Williams was left all alone in the care of a monster in Granville Ritchie, who molested and strangled the 9-year-old girl to death. The prosecutor stated that the little girl was betrayed by a family friend in Ebony Wiley, who helped with a cover-up, hoping to protect herself from any backlash that might want to come up. She later admitted on the stand, on Ritchie's trial, that she lied during the investigation. In the year 2019, after about 5 years of the fugitive escaping justice, he was later convicted of child R-word and murder. Then, fast forward to September of the next year, he was sentenced to death by a jury. And just recently, the Florida Supreme Court rejected his request for a do-over for the pretty harsh and crazy sentence that was passed on him. In a desperate measure to make sure he wasn't sentenced to death, he began asking for police records and police documents, as well as from multiple agencies. He was basically trying to spot any error that could actually aid him in escaping certain justice and give Mitchell a second chance on an appeal hearing. The prosecutors referred to this term as a fishing expedition, and also the Tampa judge. Mitchell wanted to make sure it didn't turn into one of those kinds of cases. I'm not interested in just full-scale fishing expeditions, but rather a more targeted request that could potentially lead to a colorful claim. And obviously, I would find the defendant is entitled to it. It was during a virtual hearing on a Thursday when the court got an update that documents had been turned over, and whatever evidence still needed to be given to Ritchie should be given. He immediately ruled it out by stating to the public, "I am going to grant the defendant's request for public records, solely in part as it relates to any records from the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office by their Child Protective Services." If Ritchie could manage to find any mistake in any record that he has in possession, it would give him the power to fight his death sentence and possibly overthrow it even.
What your spiritual leanings are, and it really does not matter to me either way. I am very grateful that I live in a country where people can believe or disbelieve anything they choose, and that applies to you equally. However, if you do ever pray to a higher power, either now or at some point before the date of your death is scheduled to occur, and you truly seek forgiveness and redemption for the sins and the crimes you have committed, I hope that you are granted it. And I do still see the humanity in you.
After trying to overthrow his death sentence, the court wasn't going to hear any of it as Ritchie was called to the stand, and it was proclaimed to him that the court agrees with the jury's death sentence on him, as the evidence presented agrees with a strict sentence like that. Assaulting then killing a minor should warrant a punishment worse than death. Furthermore, it was stated that the criminal would be delivered to the Florida Department of Corrections in the Florida State Prison, where he would be held in probation until a certain date of his execution would be decided by the state governor of the state of Florida. He had 3 counts of charges, and each one of them resulted in a brutal punishment, all in the case of the murder, exploitation, and assault on a minor by an adult.
Redemption for you. And what I mean by that is of your physical being, your person. You will remain incarcerated until the date of your death is scheduled to occur.
The very last thing the judge had to say to Granville Ritchie, she was blatantly stating to him in very simple terms about his spiritual leanings and all that he believed in, and urged him to pray to any higher power that he believed in between that time and when he would be executed, so that his soul would find forgiveness for the heinous crimes he had committed. She closed her statement to him saying, "May God have mercy on your soul."
There will be no corporal redemption for you. And what I mean by that is of your physical being, your person. You will remain incarcerated until the date of your death is scheduled to occur.
That was the end of the case of Granville Ritchie, who assaulted and murdered 9-year-old Felicia, leaving her family in pain and agony. His execution was later decided to be carried out by electrocution by the laws of the state and the governance. Ronnie O'Neal. In the year 2018, the pair of a mother and her daughter were brutally murdered, or better still, betrayed, by the one they never thought would betray them. Humans are cruel, but this level of cruelty is worse than any could imagine, looking at the proposed role of the murderer. In their home at Riverview, while the reasons for the murder were pretty unclear, it was a really heartbreaking and emotional story. His daughter, Ronnie, had probably the saddest exit a child with special needs could ever experience. He came into the house and attacked his own family, shooting his girlfriend and killing her on the spot. While the most aggravating of them all was his daughter, who had special needs and could not talk. She just stood there and watched as she couldn't run or talk, while her dad, Ronnie, struck her with a hatchet and killed her on the spot before setting the house on fire. His 8-year-old son, who testified against him, said that when Ronnie struck Ronnie with the hatchet, he saw a tear fall from her eyes. It was literally the most brutal way for a child to go, as she was betrayed by the one who was supposed to be her protector all through her life.
I am not sorry for something I didn't do, and I am not sorry for the things I did do.
As if the devil himself came up to earth to inhabit a body on earth and perpetrate all sorts of undoings. While being presented at court, Ronnie showed a rather nonchalant attitude toward the court and all its attendees, raising his voice and infuriating the affected with every chance he got. He started off by saying to the court that he's not sorry for what he didn't do. And damn straight, he's not sorry for what he did do. That was a statement that was clearly saying, I don't give two Fs, do your worst. The judge cautioned his lousy behavior and threatened to eject him from the court before he composed himself, not until he got another chance to say something silly again. This time he stabbed the rubber balloon with a flaming sword, facing the mother of the deceased, and said to her with a silly grin on his face, "Sorry for your loss." And that was enough to make everyone know if he saw his girlfriend and his kid again, he would kill them again without even blinking, and even in a more brutal way.
This is the worst case I have ever seen as far as the facts go.
Judge Sisko could not hide her regrets and her disappointment in the act that just happened, and the fact that the father showed not even a single blink of remorse at all. I mean, he just killed his little girl who had special needs. How could he go through with it? She furthermore stated that this case was the worst she had ever experienced in all her 19 years of being a judge.
She knew, and the horror that that child suffered, and she already had a life where she was born with challenges regarding her physical and her mental disabilities.
While killing the mother of both little Ronnie and Ronnie right before their eyes. The horror of that alone was enough to scar a child for life, especially Ronnie, who was born with challenges already. To make matters worse, he struck the little girl with a hatchet, and all she could do was shed a tear. Judge Sisko spoke with such pain and anger that you could even see she was almost crying while speaking. All that Ronnie did was just at the end of every sentence the judge made. The last thing that little Ronnie felt before she left this earth was the cruelty of her father's betrayal.
I'm going to sentence you on the attempted murder, adjudicate you guilty, sentence you to life in prison, running consecutive to counts 2 and consecutive to count 1. On count 4, on the arson, first-degree dwelling, I will adjudicate you guilty, sentence you to 30 years Florida State Prison to run consecutive to counts 1, 2, and 3. On count 5, aggravated child abuse, I'm going to adjudicate you guilty, sentence you to 30 years in the Florida State Prison to run consecutive to counts 1 through 4. On count 6, I'm going to adjudicate you guilty to aggravated child abuse, sentence you to 30 years in prison to run consecutive to counts 1 through 5. And on count 7, resisting arrest without violence, I will adjudicate you guilty, sentence you to time served. Credit for time served is 1,224 days. You have 30 days to appeal the judgment and sentence of the court. Thank you. We're concluded.
While delivering 6 counts of punishments to the prosecuted, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This sentence was repeated 3 times, making it 3 life sentences. He was also given 30 years imprisonment for assaulting a child on 2 different occasions, making it a total of 60 years imprisonment. Then, finally, for resisting arrest without violence, this was nothing compared to the other charges and counts he faced, so it was really not necessary. And then the judge ended the hearing. Carrie Lloyd, who was literally in tears for the majority of her testimony over the death of her lovely daughter Kenyatta Barron and her granddaughter Ron Nevaeh, stated to the court that she was disappointed by the jury's decision to draft life sentences for the killer instead of giving him a brutal life sentence, as he even deserved a punishment worse than death, if there's anything possibly worse than death. Amber Perera. Young people don't take the caution that states, "Don't drink and drive." And in this case, it has cost Amber her entire life, as she did not only drink and drive, but furthermore killed an entire family on the spot. The Felipek family, consisting of Louise Felipek, Rita Felipek, and their 8-year-old daughter, Georgia Felipek, all died on the Selman Expressway as a result of Amber's drunk driving. Knowing she was in for it and was pretty much screwed at this point, Amber put up a defense that she was experiencing a seizure when the accident happened and could not control herself when the accident occurred. But her prosecutors accused her of being drunk while driving, which was exactly what had happened. When she saw she was losing it, she then pleaded guilty to the court and requested a 20-year imprisonment sentence. But the judge was pretty strict and surprised the entire court with his sentence.
Yes, ma'am, your life is ruined, but you also ruined a lot of lives and ended 3 lives.
Christopher Sabella made sure he held his every word and was not lenient in passing out judgment to Amber based on what she had done. At a point, it wasn't even about the drunk driving or the lives lost, but the pain she had caused the families of those affected. Christopher Sabella made a reference to a statement she made while she was still in a jailhouse, when she said her life was ruined. He then reminded her and said, "You're correct. Your life is ruined, but you also ruined a lot of lives and then ended 3 lives also."
Knowing that she has now lost her life.
The prosecutors demanded that she be thrown in jail for life, while the defense pleaded for a 20-year sentence. But Christopher Sabella had other ideas and then found a balance between the life imprisonment plea and the 20-year plea. As a result of that, he gave Amber a sentence of 50 years, which is more or less the same thing as a life sentence. Amber was shattered, but it was a result of her actions and carelessness. But she wasn't the only one shattered as a result of it all. In general, there were several individuals affected by the accident, but it affected no one like Tracy Kelly, who would have wished that she died in the crash. Tracy Kelly was another person involved in the deadly crash, but she survived and didn't lose her life. But even with that, her life as she knew it had come to an end, as she continues to be in intense pain and suffering. She was in the 3rd vehicle affected, but didn't lose her life, like the Felipeks did. But even with that, she lives every day as if she's dying. The sentence given by the judge gave her a bit of closure, as she stated.
And that she will spend her days in pain. Just her not being happy every day brings joy to me.
Tracy said to the news that knowing she was going to spend the rest of her life in pain and that she was not going to be happy anymore brought joy to her well-being. The father of Rita And the grandfather of their little girl who died in the crash was also so emotional when he came up to the stand. He felt so terrible and could not help but shed tears while testifying. He told Amber that she could never repay him for what she had cost him, and he could not pay her back for what she had done. It was all emotions, with the father of the deceased, as he said he could never forgive her before leaving the stand drenched in tears. Stephen Lorenzo. In this somewhat weird and abysmal case, Stephen Lorenzo was being tried for a crime he committed well over 20 years ago against two men in 2003, where he allegedly murdered two men, Jason Galehouse and Michael Wachholtz. On back-to-back days, both men went missing from the Tampa club and were not found alive anymore. What's crazier, the prosecutor pleaded guilty and requested that he be sentenced to death.
In this lifetime, I'm the bad guy, you're the good guy. Maybe the next lifetime the role will be reversed, who knows. But I want to let you know that I wish you all well.
Before the sentencing took place, the state attorneys had some family members from Jason Galehouse's family who wanted to speak, but they decided not to anymore. Just then, Lorenzo raised his hand to say something to the court. He went on to thank everyone, including the prosecutors, by telling them that they did their job and did it well, stating that in this lifetime, he was the bad guy and they were the good guys. In the next lifetime, when there's a rebirth, it might be the other way around. At this point, he was beginning to sound like a psychopath, but the court gave him the floor to talk. When the mothers of both the victims of Lorenzo came on to speak earlier that month, Mrs. Ruth Wachholtz, the mother of Michael Wachholtz, and then Mrs. Pam Williams, the mother of Jason Galehouse. There was one thing that the pair kept hammering on, and that was the fact that they had been waiting for justice for quite some time now. A wholesome 2 decades they had long waited for, but now they wait no more. Mrs. Pam Williams faced Lorenzo and told him, from one Italian to another, to condono a morte, which translates to, I sentence you, Mr. Lorenzo, to death, as they felt that was the only penalty that was best for a man capable of portraying such heinous crimes. What were the crimes, you'd ask? He kidnapped Jason Galehouse and Michael Wachholtz. As if kidnapping them wasn't enough, he assaulted them both mercilessly before proceeding to R-word both men. He didn't stop there, as he proceeded to murder and mutilate both men. Dude was really crazy, but then, after 20 whole years, justice caught up with him.
The thing that was consistent in their testimony was that they have been waiting 20 years for justice. Today, that long wait ends.
This was the most shocking part of the entire hearing. Even as many expected the sentence to be a death sentence, it was a real bummer that the prosecutor was actually asking for the death sentence, which took everyone aback, even the judge. But Judge Sabella remained unfazed and continued to listen to all the accused had to say as he stated his reasons for asking to be killed instead of being in jail. While still perching on the concept of reincarnation, he told the judge that he wanted the death sentence so he could leave this world and find another body to come back to this world with, while stating, that's how it works, and that's how everything is. We are spiritual beings, and we have to leave this body eventually and come back with another, telling the judge that he's just trying to speed up the process. 20 years passed, and there possibly isn't any form of remorse to be shown over the remains of dead people who have rotted long ago, as he just spoke so freely to the judge. Albert Perkins, who was also a victim of Lorenzo but lived to tell the tale as he managed to escape when Lorenzo fell asleep, said to the hearing that he was drugged and kidnapped by Lorenzo. By the time he could open his eyes, he was already bound and was being tortured by Lorenzo. He stated that Lorenzo was always abducting gay men to use as sex slaves. Well, after his statement and pleading for a death sentence, Judge Sabella let him know he wasn't having any of it, and his testament was going to do him no good, if he was trying to play some kind of reverse psychology on him or something. He was going to judge accordingly, and that was giving the most accurate sentence. He sentenced Lorenzo to death ultimately and ended the court session with a parting word: "May God have mercy on your soul." To which the prosecuted replied, "My soul's fine." Mark Sievers, dated the 28th of June, 2015, while Teresa Sievers was enjoying a peaceful day in her home, located in Bonita Springs, Florida, two men broke into the house and murdered her in the most brutal way possible by using a hammer to bludgeon her 17 times until she died. 6 months later, police arrested the two men who carried out the murder, Curtis Wayne Wright Jr. and Jimmy J. Rogers, both from Missouri. Wondering what Mark Sievers had to do with the crime, right? Well, I'll let you in on it. He was the one who masterminded everything that happened. And yes, contracted the killers who murdered his wife in their home. She was actually returning home from a family vacation as she was returning alone to a house that she thought was empty. Unknown to her, two men were waiting to murder her. As she pulled up in the driveway, she brought her luggage out of the vehicle and began making her way inside the house. When she got to the kitchen, that was when the two men attacked her, plunging a hammer into her head until she died. It was stated that her husband, Mark, had been planning it for a while, some weeks to be precise, when he traveled to Missouri for Curtis's wedding. Curtis then recruited Jay Rogers, promising him some part of the money from what Mark was going to give him. He probably didn't believe in his marriage and trust his wife completely. The whole motive was life insurance money and the fear that Teresa would take their children away. This would have shown that the couple was having issues between one another, but whatever it is, it still does not warrant taking someone's life, let alone your wife, whom you wedded in holy matrimony. Leaving your kids without a mother was the most stupid thing he could do, but that was just the least of everything, as he got a more terrible sentence than he was hoping for. Plus, he promised to give Curtis $100,000 from the life insurance money, and it was from that money that Curtis hired Rogers to be his buddy, promising him spoils from after the dreaded event. Mark Sievers, Curtis Wayne Wright, and Jimmy J. Rogers were all convicted of murder, be it first degree or second degree. Rogers' girlfriend was the Oliver Twist to the entire case, as she spilled the beans to the police about her boyfriend admitting to killing the medical personnel, and all investigations and interrogations led to discovering the truth and apprehending the culprits. You'd think that since Mark didn't actively participate in the murder of his wife, he would not get a harsh sentence. But then think again. He had the worst punishments of the three men. The 12 jurors would have to come to an agreed decision to sentence Mark to death if that's what they wanted. And yes, they wanted a death sentence instead of a life sentence. Even as it was looking likely that he would get a life sentence, it took the jury 4 hours to decide, and Judge Kyle sentenced Mark Sievers to death. There was an obvious relief on the face of the siblings and family of Teresa as they could finally put the case behind them and try to move on with their lives. When justice is not served, it troubles and disturbs the minds of the affected, and it's been 4 years since her death. And finally, justice was served to the pleasing of everyone except the man who got the death sentence, though. Furthermore, Teresa's mother got custody of both kids, who are now orphans, due to the greediness and ruthlessness of their father, who could have taken a better approach to his marital issues than taking the life of his wife.
It's the order of the court that you be sentenced to death, sir.
While both Mark Sievers' daughters stated that they do not want their dad to be killed, the judge stated that he would put that into consideration. But in the end, he decided to go ahead with the jury's decision to sentence Mark to death, turning 2 little girls into orphans before they even hit puberty. Cases out there are sure to give you the creeps and the fright of life, but that's life, and life just has to happen. Some humans are pretty much not human, Let me know which one of these cases was the most dreaded for you and who you would have given a lighter punishment or perhaps a worse punishment. Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed these cases, then make sure to check out our next ones shown on screen.